The UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter sliced through the darkened sky, its rotors beating a steady rhythm over the lifeless landscape below. Sergeant Ethan Cole sat rigid, his rifle resting across his lap, eyes locked on the distant lights of Hollow Creek, at least, what should have been lights. Instead, there was only darkness. Still no radio contact? Captain Julia Mercer asked, her voice barely audible over the thrum of the engine. Negative, Specialist Diaz responded, adjusting the headset strapped to his helmet. Town's gone dark. No power, no comms, nothing. Last transmission was 3 days ago. After that? Radio silence. Cole exhaled sharply. Hollow Creek was a small mining town, population just over 2,000. Now, it was a ghost town. As the Black Hawk descended toward the main street, the squad's nerves tightened. The town looked wrong. No movement, no signs of life. The only sound was the chopper's downdraft kicking up dust and loose debris. Streetlights stood like hollow sentinels, unlit. Abandoned cars, some with doors left wide open, littered the road. A few had crashed into lampposts or buildings, as if their drivers had lost control. Eyes up, Mercer ordered as they disembarked. The helicopter lifted off, banking away to establish a perimeter sweep. The team, 7 elite soldiers, fanned out, weapons raised. Cole's boots crunched against broken glass. He scanned the storefronts lining Main Street, grocery store, pharmacy, diner. A help wanted sign still clung to a diner window, swaying slightly in the breeze. A plate of half-eaten food sat on a table inside, now rotten and covered in mold. "What the hell happened here?" muttered Private Brooks. "Let's find out," Mercer said. "Cole, take point." "We move in formation." Cole nodded, moving cautiously. The silence pressed in, unnatural and thick. They approached the sheriff's station first, hoping to find records, clues. The front door hung open, swinging slightly on its hinges. Inside, the station was eerily still. Papers scattered across desks, an overturned chair. A coffee mug, long dried, sat abandoned on a filing cabinet. Diaz knelt by a desk, flipping through logs. "Last entry was 3 days ago," he said. Sheriff Powell reported. He stopped. "Reported what?" Mercer pressed. Diaz hesitated. "Something about a sickness. People getting violent. Attacking others." A long, pained groan echoed from the hallway. Everyone froze. Cole signaled, and the team moved forward, sweeping the dim corridor. The cells at the back held their breath, darkness pooling in the corners. The groan came again, from the last cell. Cole stepped forward, weapon aimed. "Sheriff Powell?" A shape twitched in the darkness. A man slumped against the bars, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. His chest rose and fell in ragged, jerky breaths. His face was pale, lips cracked, skin sickly. His uniform, badged with Powell's name, was stained with something dark. "Sir?" Mercer called out. Powell's eyes snapped open. His pupils were clouded, his expression twisted. Then, with an inhuman snarl, he lunged at the bars. The impact rattled the entire cell block. "Holy shit!" Brooks stumbled back. Powell's jaw snapped open and shut, teeth gnashing, fingers clawing through the air, his body convulsing with unnatural spasms. His breath reeked of rot. "Stand down." Mercer barked, but Powell only thrashed harder. Diaz scanned him with wide eyes. "Captain, this isn't normal." Before Mercer could respond, a sound drifted in from outside. A distant, rising chorus of moans. Not one. Not two. Hundreds. Cole tightened his grip on his rifle. They weren't alone. "Contact, outside." Diaz shouted, rushing to the station's front window. The street, once deathly quiet, now stirred with movement. Shadows emerged from alleyways, from inside buildings, from behind abandoned cars. Figures staggered forward in eerie unison, their eyes vacant, their movements jerky but purposeful. "Jesus Christ," Brooks breathed. They're everywhere. Everyone, fall back to the second floor. Now. Mercer ordered. The team bolted up the stairwell as the first undead slammed against the glass doors, their bodies hitting with sickening thuds. Hands clawed, teeth snapped. Some had dried blood streaked across their faces, others bore fresh wounds, bullet holes, deep gouges, torn flesh. They're infected, Cole muttered, gripping his rifle. They're not human anymore. Mercer didn't need to be convinced. Diaz, any way to call the chopper? Diaz shook his head, adjusting his comms. I'm trying, but something's jamming our signal. Great, Brooks muttered. Stranded in Zombie Central with no way out. Below them, the glass doors shattered. The horde poured in. Open fire! Mercer commanded. The air filled with the thunder of gunfire. Bullets tore through rotting flesh, skulls exploded into red mist, and bodies collapsed in heaps. But more kept coming. Click. Cole cursed, ejecting his spent magazine. As he reloaded, he caught movement in his periphery. One of the infected had managed to climb onto a nearby dumpster and was pulling itself through a second-story window. Up high, he yelled, spinning his rifle toward it. The creature lunged before he could fire. Cole barely had time to throw up his arm. The thing crashed into him, its teeth snapping inches from his face. Its breath was rancid, its fingers clawing at his gear. A gunshot rang out. The creature's skull exploded, showering coal and gore. Mercer yanked him back to his feet. Keep your head on, Sergeant. More of them were climbing. Some scrambled up drain pipes, others hoisted themselves onto awnings, their hunger driving them beyond human limits. They're adapting, Diaz whispered in horror. They're not just mindless, Mercer realized. They're learning. A deep, guttural growl rumbled from below. The horde parted as something big stepped through the wreckage of the sheriff's station door. A monstrous figure loomed in the dim light, standing nearly 7 feet tall. Its body was grotesquely swollen, its muscles rippling under sickly, stretched skin. Clawed hands twitched as its pale, lidless eyes scanned the room above. It wasn't just a mindless infected, it was hunting them. Then it charged. The walls shook as the creature plowed into the stairwell, smashing through debris like a freight train. Move, move, move. Mercer bellowed. The squad sprinted down the hallway, kicking open a door that led to the rooftop. Brooks was the last one out, but before he could clear the threshold, the creature's massive hand snatched his ankle. Help! Brooks screamed as he was yanked back inside. No! Cole turned, firing round after round into the thing's back, but it didn't even flinch. Mercer grabbed Cole by the vest and hauled him onto the roof just as Brooks' final scream cut short with a sickening crunch. They barely had time to breathe before a new sound made their blood run cold. A second growl. Then a third. The town wasn't just infected. It was evolving. And they were trapped in the middle of it. The rooftop offered no comfort. The air was thick with decay, the moans of the horde below rising like a funeral chorus. Cole wiped Brooks' blood off his gloves, his jaw clenched tight. Another man lost. We need to move, Mercer said, eyes scanning the town. Fast. Diaz adjusted his radio. Still no signal. Something's jamming us. Then we find another way out. Mercer pointed to a nearby fire escape that led to the adjacent building. We cross through there. Quietly. Cole took point, stepping onto the metal grating. It groaned under his weight, but held. One by one, the team followed. Below, dozens of infected milled about, sniffing the air, their heads twitching unnaturally. The team reached the opposite rooftop just as a piercing screech echoed through the night. Mercer turned sharply. What the hell was that? The answer came swiftly. From the far end of the street, figures dropped from the buildings, not stumbling, but moving with terrifying speed. They landed on all fours before straightening, their heads snapping toward the team. Their limbs were long and gaunt, their mouths stretched too wide, exposing rows of razor-sharp teeth. "Oh, hell no," Diaz whispered. The creatures bolted toward them, moving in a grotesque, animalistic sprint. "Run!" Mercer shouted. The team sprinted toward a rooftop access door. Cole kicked it open, and they piled inside, slamming it shut just as one of the creatures crashed into it. The door shuddered violently. "They're not just zombies," Cole panted. "They're something else." Mercer locked eyes with him. "And they're hunting us." The door rattled again, the metal bending inward. "We can't hold this position," Diaz said. "We need a way out." Cole scanned the room. A stairwell led downward. "No choice." "Basement," he said. "It might connect to the underground tunnels the miners used." Mercer nodded. "Move." The team descended cautiously, their flashlights cutting through the dark. The air grew thick with mildew and rot. Then Cole saw it. A tunnel entrance, half hidden behind collapsed debris. Old mining equipment lay scattered, rusted, and forgotten. Diaz exhaled in relief. "That's our way out." A thunderous crash echoed from above. The creatures had broken through. "Go!" Mercer ordered. They darted into the tunnel just as the screeching monsters poured into the stairwell behind them. The underground maze stretched into darkness, the walls pressing in tight. Their footsteps echoed. The air was stale, damp. Then Cole stopped. Something was ahead. A soft, wet dripping sound. His flashlight beam landed on a corpse. No, corpses. Bodies hung from the ceiling, cocooned in some kind of sickly webbing, their faces frozen in horror. And in the darkness beyond, something moved. Cole's breath caught in his throat. The webbed corpses dangled from the ceiling, their bodies twisted, their faces frozen in an eternal scream. Some were fresh, others were nothing more than hollowed-out husks. Mercer stepped forward, her flashlight scanning the grotesque scene. "What the hell is this?" Diaz swallowed hard. "I don't think we're dealing with just a virus anymore." A wet slithering sound echoed from deeper in the tunnel. Cole swung his rifle up. "Something's in here with us." The team moved carefully, stepping over debris and puddles of stagnant water. The tunnel walls were coated in a strange, organic substance, pale, veined like flesh, pulsing faintly. Then came the sound. A clicking. Slow, deliberate. Echoing from all directions. Diaz's hands trembled. "That's not human." Cole scanned ahead, his heart pounding. His flashlight caught a shape shifting in the darkness, something huge crouched among the corpses, its elongated limbs twitching, its body heaving with slow, unnatural breaths. Then, with sickening speed, it unfolded. A towering abomination stepped into the light, its skeletal frame covered in patches of rotting flesh and that same webbed substance. Its head was elongated, its mouth stretching vertically rather than horizontally. Rows of jagged teeth gleamed as a long, black tongue flicked out, tasting the air. Then it screamed, a high-pitched, bone-chilling sound that made the walls vibrate. The cocooned corpses twitched. And then, they started moving. "Oh, hell no," Diaz gasped, backpedaling. The cocoon victims weren't dead. Their bodies convulsed, breaking free from their wrappings, their jaws unhinging in a sick parody of a scream. Their eyes were gone, replaced with writhing, black tendrils. "Open fire!" Mercer roared. The tunnel exploded with gunfire. Cole emptied his magazine into the closest creature, its chest tearing open, but it kept moving. Diaz blasted another, but the tendrils in its head kept it alive, its body twitching violently as it lunged forward. Mercer switched tactics, headshots weren't working. She aimed low, taking out their legs. "Go for the joints," she shouted. The tactic worked. The creatures collapsed, writhing on the ground. But the tall abomination was still advancing. It leaped forward, moving impossibly fast. It slammed into Cole, sending him flying into a wall. The impact knocked the breath from his lungs. He barely rolled away before its clawed hand came down, shattering the concrete where he'd been a second earlier. Mercer and Diaz unloaded on it, bullets shredding through its chest. It staggered, but it didn't stop. Cole scrambled up, drawing his combat knife. It wasn't much, but he had one shot. The creature lunged again, this time at Mercer. Cole reacted on instinct. He plunged the knife into its throat, twisting hard. The abomination let out a choked, gurgling shriek. A thick, black liquid oozed from the wound. It stumbled, convulsed, then collapsed in a twitching heap. The remaining creatures faltered, as if suddenly disoriented. "Now's our chance, run!" Mercer shouted. The team sprinted deeper into the tunnel, not stopping to look back. The clicking sounds faded behind them. But Cole knew this wasn't over. They hadn't just found the infected. They had stumbled into their nest. And something far worse was waiting ahead. The tunnel walls throbbed, pulsing like a living thing. Every surface was coated in that sickly, veined webbing, the air thick with the stench of decay. The deeper they ran, the more unnatural it became, like they weren't underground anymore, but inside something alive. Cole's breathing was ragged. The thing they had killed, it wasn't just a mutation. It had controlled the others. And if it was just one of many. "We need to find an exit, now," Mercer said, gripping her rifle tightly. Diaz checked his tracker. "There's an opening up ahead. Looks like a larger chamber." "That could be good or bad," Cole muttered. They pressed forward, their boots squelching in the filth coating the floor. The tunnel sloped downward, the space widening. Then, the tunnel opened up into a massive underground cavern. And what they saw stole the breath from their lungs. Hanging from the cavern's ceiling, hundreds, maybe thousands, of bodies were suspended in thick, pulsating sacs. Some were still. Others twitched, their distorted silhouettes struggling inside. "The hell is this?" Diaz whispered, horrified. Cole took a step forward, and the ground shifted beneath his feet. He looked down. The entire cavern floor was made of bodies, some dead, some still breathing, fused together by the grotesque organic webbing. And in the center of the cavern stood something enormous. A grotesque, pulsating mass, flesh merging into the cavern walls, with veins as thick as tree roots stretching outward. Embedded in its bloated form were faces, mouths opening in silent screams. Its core throbbed, like it was breathing. Then, it moved. A low, guttural groan rumbled through the chamber. The pulsating hive began to shift, veins tightening, sacs trembling. Diaz took a step back. "That thing, it's alive." Mercer's expression darkened. "More than that, it's the source." Suddenly, a deep, guttural voice echoed through the cavern. Not from a single throat, but from every mouth in the hive at once. "We see you." Cole's blood ran cold. The sacs above burst open, spilling out fresh horrors, twisted, deformed creatures that looked like they had been human once. Their jaws unhinged, releasing an ear-splitting shriek. Then, they attacked. "Fire!" Mercer shouted. The cavern erupted into chaos. The creatures swarmed, crawling over the walls, the ceiling, the floor, unstoppable. Cole fired until his rifle clicked empty, then switched to his sidearm, blasting anything that moved. Diaz was already tossing grenades into the horde, explosions ripping through the writhing mass. But more kept coming. "We can't hold this position," Cole yelled. Mercer gritted her teeth. Then she made a decision. "We take out the hive core," she ordered. "If we don't, this doesn't end." Diaz's eyes widened. "How the hell do we?" A thunderous roar shook the cavern. The hive core was waking up. Tendrils erupted from the ground, lashing toward them like living whips. The walls trembled as the entire cavern began to collapse inward, like the hive itself was preparing to consume them. Mercer grabbed Diaz's last det pack. "We blow it to hell." She shoved it into Cole's hands. "Set it, now!" Cole didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the pulsating mass, dodging lunging creatures and whipping tendrils. His boots slipped on the slick, fleshy surface, but he kept going, forcing himself forward. He reached the center, his heart pounding. The hive's mouths all turned toward him, screaming in unison. "Not today, you ugly bastard," he growled, planting the det pack against its throbbing core. Then he turned and ran for his life. "Blow it!" Mercer shouted. Diaz hit the detonator. A blinding explosion rocked the cavern. The hive screeched, its entire body convulsing, tendrils whipping wildly as fire and shrapnel ripped through it. The creatures shrieked, collapsing one by one. The cavern began to cave in. Cole, Mercer, and Diaz sprinted toward an old mine shaft, barely making it through as the tunnel collapsed behind them. The last thing Cole heard was the hive's dying scream, echoing through the ruins of Hollow Creek. Then, silence. The tunnel shook violently, dust and debris cascading from the ceiling as the last echoes of the hive's death throes faded into the darkness. Cole, Mercer, and Diaz ran for their lives, sprinting through the collapsing mine shaft. "Go, go, go!" Mercer bellowed, shoving Diaz forward as a steel support beam crashed inches behind them. Cole's lungs burned, his legs screamed in protest, but he kept moving. The detonation had crippled the hive, but the blast had also weakened the tunnel. If they didn't make it out in time, they'd be buried alive. Diaz's voice came through ragged breaths. "I see light, exit ahead." Cole looked up, and sure enough, a sliver of daylight peeked through the end of the passage. It was small, narrow, but it was hope. They pushed harder, the roar of collapsing earth chasing them. Just as another massive tremor rattled the tunnel, the team burst through the opening, diving onto the forest floor as the mine entrance caved in behind them. Dust filled the air. Then, silence. For the first time since entering Hollow Creek, the only sound was the wind rustling through the trees. Cole rolled onto his back, staring up at the gray sky, his heart hammering. "We made it," Diaz gasped. "Holy shit, we made it." Mercer sat up, still gripping her rifle. Her uniform was torn, her face streaked with dirt and sweat. "Don't celebrate yet," she said. "We need to get to the evac point." Diaz groaned. "We just outran a damn hive of nightmares. Can't we take, 5 minutes? Mercer shot him a look. "Do you want to walk home?" Diaz sighed. "Point taken." Cole forced himself up, shaking off the exhaustion. They had destroyed the hive, but there were still unanswered questions. The infection in Hollow Creek hadn't been a random outbreak. Someone, or something, had caused it. And that meant, it could happen again. Mercer tapped her radio. "Command, this is Omega Team. Do you read me?" For a moment, static crackled. Then, "Omega Team, this is Command. We read you loud and clear. Where the hell have you been?" Mercer exhaled, relief flickering across her face. "It's a long story. We need immediate extraction. Hollow Creek is a total loss, the source has been neutralized, but there's no telling if it's completely wiped out." "Understood. We're sending a bird. ETA, 10 minutes. Be ready." Cole turned, taking one last look at the ruins of the town. The horrors they had faced underground, the monsters, the hive, the things that had once been human, all of it would be buried beneath the rubble. But something deep in his gut told him it wasn't over. Diaz sighed. "I don't care what happens next, I'm putting in for a desk job after this." Mercer smirked. "You'd last 2 days before losing your mind." Cole let out a tired chuckle. "I'll tell you this much, if we ever get another assignment like this." He glanced at Mercer. "Next time, you're buying the drinks." Mercer shook her head. "If there's a next time," she said, watching the tree lean warily. "Then we're already screwed." Above them, the sound of chopper blades filled the air. Extraction was here. But as they prepared to leave, none of them spoke the thought lingering in all their minds. Hollow Creek was just the beginning.